Welcome to COMR 103, Speaking and Listening, Chapter 13. This is going to be all on persuasive speaking, and this will set you up for your final presentation in week 8 of persuasive speeches. All right, first of all, of course, we have to have a definition, and persuasion, as you can see, is a symbolic process in which you as the communicator try to convince other people to change their attitudes or behaviors regarding an issue through the transmission of a message. So let's take, for example, the topic of legalizing marijuana. So maybe you are in favor of legalizing marijuana, and you're going to bring in some stats, some facts, and you're going to try to convince your audience that they should also think about legalizing marijuana. So what you would do is you would start with a proposition, which is that central idea statement of what you want to do. So basically the purpose of your talk, and we call it a proposition in a persuasive type speech. Then your target audience, of course, would be the people that you're talking to, and maybe there's 10 of them, maybe there's 50 of them, maybe there's 100 people in the audience, and you're trying to convince them or persuade them to think the way that you're thinking. And then, of course, you'll have that mental dialogue with them back and forth throughout your presentation. The chapter then goes into several other terms: selective exposure, cognitive dissonance, and two-tailed arguments. The one that I would like to discuss is the cognitive dissonance. Take a look at the actual definition on your slide. It's a phenomena where people confronted with a conflicting information or viewpoint reach a state of dissonance. And what does that mean? It's the disagreement between the conflicting thoughts and or actions. So they're having a tug of war, I guess you might want to say, in their mind, and they're uncomfortable about the situation, the topic at hand, and now they're trying to figure out which way they want to go with it. So cognitive dissonance, you'll hear that word very much in a persuasive presentation, because cognitive meaning the mind or the intelligence, and then of course dissonance meaning trying to figure out which way you're going to go with it. The chapter then goes on and talks about three very important terms when it comes to persuasive speech, and that is ethos, logos, and pathos. Now, this was coined way back when, 2,500 years ago, by one of our great philosophers, Aristotle. And ethos is the meaning of credibility. Like, how does a speaker earn credibility? Typically, you would see that in any kind of conference or any event that you go to, that they would have a bio in the program, and you can kind of read through their bio to see what kind of credibility they have, such as maybe they've been a lawyer for 25 years, they were a circuit judge, and they've got the credibility to speak today, and they know what they're talking about. They have the knowledge. Then the logo side of it is when they present their persuasive talk. The logo side is a logical portion of their presentation. Again, back to their stats and their data and their facts, their examples, everything they're bringing to the table, and they're trying to show you that the logical piece of this persuasive speech is 100% true. And then finally, the pathos, which is the emotional side. Typically, most speakers who are giving persuasive speeches will provide examples, stories in their past, or ones that they've known, or somebody that they've known that has gone through that particular situation. And they try to appeal to the emotional side of the audience's brain, I guess you might want to say, to see if they can persuade them to think the way that they want them to think. Finally, the chapter kind of starts getting into constructing a persuasive speech, and it goes into different propositions. I believe there's 4 or 5 of them we'll be discussing here. The first one being proposition of fact, which sounds the way it is. That very simply, you're using proposition of fact to persuade your audience through actual factual data, and you bring that data into the presentation, and you give credit where credit is due. You tell them where the sources that you got your information. Maybe you've got some charts, some bar graphs, some diagrams that you bring with you to try to prove it through proposition of fact. The other 3 that the chapter discusses is proposition of definition, of value, and of policy. So breaking each one of these down here. Of course, proposition of definition, you'll see a lot of lawyers use this. If you ever have been in a trial court and you're sitting there, you will see the lawyers use proposition of definition. They'll bring out a bunch of fancy terms, and they're trying to very simply persuade the jury to either go guilty or not guilty based on definition of certain terms that they're utilizing. Proposition of value is, good, bad, ugly. And then finally, proposition of policy, and you'll see that done a lot in state legislatures, the federal government. They basically propose a policy, and they try to persuade their constituents or the people of our country to vote a certain way, and they do that through proposition of value. Finally, the chapter wraps it up by a very well-known sequence called the Monroe's Motivated Sequence. And it steps through a 5-step process of how to persuade your audience to agree or disagree with what you're trying to say. The first step is, of course, attention. You want to grab the audience's attention with some startling statistics and introduce them to the proposition that you're going to be talking about. Then the need. What need does your audience have about this particular topic? So it's very important to do an audience analysis to find out where they stand on a certain topic. Satisfaction, you start working through your proposition. You start bringing in all of your information to try to help them to see it your way, basically, and try to satisfy their need, I guess you might want to say, which then leads you to visualization. And the audience needs to visualize they see this particular proposition or this particular persuasive speech that you're presenting, that they see and they understand where you're coming from. And hopefully the final stage of action, you want them to take action on your speech and either go and vote, or maybe, who knows, maybe you can persuade several of them in the audience to change the way they're thinking and see it the way you see it. So that's taking action. So the persuasive speech actually goes in through a 5-step process, and it's Monroe's Motivated Sequence is very popular with that particular strategy. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed Chapter 13 on persuasive speaking. Hopefully you'll use some of this information as you guys design, create, get ready, practice your persuasive speeches that are due in week 8. I wish you the best of luck as you guys get ready for this particular presentation. And again, I'll see you on my next video.